Hi, and welcome to VisibilOT, a podcast dedicated to raising awareness, providing education, and advocating for individuals living with invisible disabilities and chronic conditions. I'm your host, Lisa, and I'm passionate about providing education and support for individuals and healthcare providers alike to bring visibility to an often misunderstood population. Before we get started, I want to emphasize that the information provided in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or therapeutic advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider for personal medical concerns. Today we're going to be talking about a term that you may or may not be familiar with, and if you're not, don't worry because we will define it, and that term is gaslighting. I hear the term gaslighting being used so frequently in videos and social media, so today we're going to unpack what gaslighting is, explore how it shows up in healthcare, personal relationships, and society at large. And most importantly, we're going to discuss how to identify it and how to protect yourself. Whether you've experienced gaslighting or you're someone who wants to avoid being a gaslighter, this episode is for you. Let's start by defining gaslighting. What the heck does gaslighting even mean? Well, gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where a person or group starts to make someone question their reality, their perceptions, or their feelings. Little history lesson for you that I didn't know, but the term originated from a 1938 play called Gaslight, which was later adapted into a film where a husband manipulates his wife into thinking she's losing her sanity by altering elements of her environment and denying her observations. So what does that mean in the context of chronic conditions or invisible disabilities? Well, in this case, gaslighting often involves dismissing or invalidating someone's experiences, symptoms, or needs. It can sound like the classic, "it's all in your head," or "you're just being dramatic," or even the "everyone gets tired, you're just overreacting." But for individuals who are already dealing with the physical and emotional toll of a chronic condition, gaslighting just adds an extra layer of harm. It can leave you doubting yourself, delaying necessary care, and feeling isolated. So how does gaslighting manifest in healthcare? Well, one of the most common places that people with chronic conditions experience gaslighting is in the healthcare settings, unfortunately. Many of us have gone to a doctor with real debilitating symptoms only to be met with, "your tests are normal, so there's nothing going on," or "you're just stressed, try to relax," or "you should lose weight or exercise more, and then you'll feel better." And I know y'all know it, but this kind of invalidation can be devastating, especially when you know something isn't right with your body. Chronic conditions like long COVID, fibromyalgia, ME/CFS, POTS, they often don't show up in standardized tests. A lot of them don't have any sort of biomarker that you can test for. And their symptoms can be vague and sometimes overlap with other conditions. And this can lead to a lot of barriers in diagnosis. And when healthcare providers dismiss these symptoms, they're not only delaying care, but also eroding trust in the healthcare system. So what about gaslighting in personal relationships? Unfortunately, gaslighting doesn't only happen in the doctor's office, it can also show up in our personal lives. For example, a friend might say, "Well, you don't look sick. Are you sure you're not just being lazy?" Or a family member might question your diagnosis and say, "Maybe if you tried yoga or exercised more, you'd feel better." Or even a romantic partner might accuse you of exaggerating your symptoms to avoid responsibilities. And these interactions, whether they're intentional or not, can feel like emotional gut punches. Chronic illness is already so isolating, and then when the people closest to you doubt your reality, it can just deepen those feelings of loneliness and frustration. But it's important to recognize that gaslighting in relationships often stems from a lack of understanding or discomfort with your condition. This absolutely does not excuse it, but it can help to approach these conversations with a balance of assertiveness and education. Having these conversations is hard, but it's one of the best ways to educate the people around us so that they're able to better support us. On a broader level, societal attitudes often gaslight people with invisible disabilities. Those super common phrases like, you don't look sick, or the societal expectations to just push through and keep going, just perpetuate the idea, the incorrect idea, that chronic illness is just a mindset problem. In workplaces, this might look like being accused of faking or exaggerating your condition to get out of work tasks. Or in public spaces, it could be those dirty looks or comments when you're using an accessible parking spot or a mobility aid with a disability that isn't obvious. This form of gaslighting is insidious because it reinforces the idea that you have to prove your illness or disability or make yourself look sicker to be taken seriously by other people. And it shifts the burden of validation onto the person who is already struggling, which can lead to feelings of shame and inadequacy. And the last form of gaslighting I'm going to talk about is self-gaslighting, which I don't think is talked about enough, but it's definitely something that I've experienced, and I'm sure others have too. For this, I'll tell you a little personal anecdote story. So just for a little background and context, in occupational therapy school, I did one of my level 1 fieldwork rotations at a long COVID clinic. And when I was there, patient after patient after patient would come in and explain these problems that seemed like something that occupational therapy could really help with. However, they were really struggling to find access to these services or rehab professionals that were educated in what long COVID is and how to treat it. And that's what initially sparked my passion into learning more about these conditions so that one day I could be a better healthcare provider to this population. Well, fast forward to when I'm completing my doctoral capstone in the role of OT in long COVID, and I myself got sick. And I'm someone who spent years of grad school researching these conditions and learning more about long COVID and post-exertional malaise, what it looks like, what to do for it. And even when I started experiencing these symptoms myself, I didn't want to believe it. I was in denial. I gaslit myself for months, saying, oh, you're at the tail end of your grad program. You're probably just stressed and burnt out and tired. Or you're doing your project in long COVID, so surely you're making up these psychological symptoms in your head because you spend so much time researching them. Like, I just assured myself that there was no way. But months and months and months passed, and I continued to get worse and not better, of course, because what happens when you ignore your symptoms? Nothing good. But sometimes it's easier to gaslight yourself and say, there's no way, than it is to accept the reality of what's happening and create an action plan to go forward. And even when I finally went to seek diagnosis or answers, and I had tons of lab work run, and all my tests came back negative, I still had moments of, is it all in my head? Am I crazy or stressed or just burnt out? Even though I knew inside that that wasn't the case, it's still easy for those thoughts to creep in. In undergrad, I was a college athlete, and I was a biology and psychology double major, and I worked 3 part-time jobs, so I know what it's like to be overworked and stressed and burnt out. And the fatigue I felt with long COVID is a million times worse and unlike anything I've ever experienced. So it's important to continue to advocate for yourself, even when your symptoms might not make sense to you or anybody else. Because the truth is, gaslighting can really affect our mental health. Whether it's coming from an external source or you're gaslighting yourself, this repeated invalidation can lead to things like self-doubt, where you begin to question your experience and wonder if you're imagining or exaggerating symptoms. It can cause anxiety, where you're feeling the need to constantly prove yourself or defend yourself. And it can even lead to depression. Feeling unsupported or dismissed can lead to feelings of hopelessness and isolation. And for many, these mental health struggles compound with the physical challenges of the condition and create this vicious cycle that's hard to break. So, how do I recognize gaslighting and help protect myself from it? Recognizing gaslighting can be hard, especially if it's subtle or you've been experiencing it for a long time. But here are a few red flags. 1, if you feel the need to repeatedly explain or defend your experiences or symptoms. 2, you're told your experiences or feelings are wrong or exaggerated. 3, if you begin to start doubting your own memory, perceptions, or judgments after interacting with a certain person or group. Or 4, you feel dismissed, invalidated, or unsupported despite clearly communicating your needs. So, what do we do about it? It's important to trust yourself. You know your body better than anybody else, and trust that your symptoms and experiences are real even if others don't validate them. I find it helpful to keep a journal or symptom tracker to document experiences. Another tip is to set boundaries. If someone is constantly invalidating you, it's okay to limit your interactions with that person. Always remember to advocate yourself, and in healthcare settings, this could be bringing a trusted person to appointments, asking for second opinions, or requesting referrals to specialists who understand your condition. And also, don't forget to seek out support. Connect with other people who understand through support groups, online communities, or therapy. Sometimes knowing you're not alone can make a huge difference. Remember, you are not responsible for making others believe your experiences. Your priority is you and your well-being. Gaslighting is a painful experience that can affect anyone, but for those living with chronic conditions and invisible disabilities, it's an added layer of stress and harm. By understanding what gaslighting is, recognizing it when it happens, and learning how to respond, we can protect ourselves and create a more supportive, empathetic community. Thank you for joining me today on VisibilOT. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. For more insights and tips, follow me on Instagram at VisibilOT, that's VisibilOT, and don't forget to subscribe to the VisibilOT Podcast to stay connected. Please consider taking time to leave a review or rating on whatever platform you're listening on. And until next time, take care and stay visible.